It's yours, friend, your boy, Jet Black the One Only, here with another exciting live stream. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about my day-to-day, August 19th, 2019. I'll also be talking with you on the live chat. Make sure that if you're tuning in to smash that like button. Tell me how you're doing in the live chat. Ask any questions you have and bring up any discussion topics you'd like to talk about on the stream. Give me one moment. I'm about to set up the live chat on my desktop. That way it'll be easier for me to see what messages you guys send in the live chat. Yo, Vanessa Brooks, welcome to the stream, and Dragon Ball Superfan 10, welcome to the stream. It's good to have you. Don't forget to smash that like button. How's your day today? Do you have any questions for your boy? Do you have any discussion topics you'd like to talk about on the stream? Today was my first real day getting to work on a new project that I've been doing for my job, and things have been going swell so far. Also, thank you guys for smashing that like button. Truly appreciate it. Kel said, "Hey yo, right now I'm drawing a poker game character." Oh, cool. What poker game character are you drawing, Kel? So welcome to the stream. It's good to have you. Don't forget to smash that like button. How's your day? Do you have any questions for your boy? Do you have any discussion topics you'd like to talk about on the stream? Let's see. Other than work, I learned about a new character that I didn't know about earlier today. There's this character from DC Comics called Jakeem Thunder. He's essentially like a young African American boy who finds a pin that allows him to summon a genie, and he can kind of wish for almost whatever he wants. There are some limitations, like the genie can't kill people or bring people back to life, stuff like that. But other than that, he can kind of do whatever. And the genie isn't a traditional genie. He's like an imp from the fifth dimension, and in DC Comics, the fifth dimension is like the land where imagination comes from. It's kind of cool, but I'm kind of feeling Jakeem. I think he's a cool character. Vanessa Brooks said, "I'm doing good playing Fire Emblem Three Houses." Oh, Matt has already beaten Fire Emblem Three Houses. He's currently doing his second playthrough, but him and Colin were talking about that game the other day. Matt said, "Fire Emblem?" He said, "Jet, time to buy a Switch." I don't really think there are any Switch games that I'm super hype about. You know what I mean? Also, I would want the Nintendo Switch to have some kind of built-in streaming capability. Then Matt said, "No, no, no." Then Vanessa Brooks put the smiley face with the halo emoji. But hey, it's good to see everybody tuning in. How are you guys doing? I also did a edited photos cosplay video earlier today. Feel free to check that out if you guys want to. Matt said, "Jet, stop having bad opinions about streaming." Eh, good or bad is subjective. Dragon Ball Superfan 10 said, "Hopefully the RPG Tokyo Ghoul game is good and not repetitive." Fingers crossed. I haven't checked out Tokyo Ghoul. I've heard good things though. I don't think I've heard anyone like shit on Tokyo Ghoul or anything like that. Let's see. And then Matt said, "You also screwed Dozer hard in that game." So the other day, I was hanging out with your boys, Dozer. It's time to remember everybody's name. Dozer, London, Colin, Gerard, Matt, and Max. And at a certain point, we started playing a game where the whole goal of the game is to try and make a D&D character, more or less. But Dozer seemed like he wasn't really hyped to play, and I wanted to play, but I didn't have a lot of time to. So I played for, excuse me, a little bit, and then I had to dip out. So I'm imagining Dozer took my place, but in the end, the actions that I had taken while I was playing the game ended up not benefiting Dozer, based on what I can understand from Matt's comment, but I'm sure he'll elaborate or not. Vanessa Brooks said, "Hug Sephiroth, we will rule the world," then had two demon emojis. Summon Black Materia. This is very specific references going on. Is that some Final Fantasy I hear? Or is that a Tokyo Ghoul thing? Either way, don't know a lot about either. Matt said Tokyo Ghoul is super edgy. Then Vanessa Brooks said, "I love Tokyo Ghoul." Then Nani said hi. He said, "Where's Bloodbath?" Yo, Nani, welcome to the stream. It's good to have you. How's your day today? Don't forget to smash that like button. And feel free to tell us if you have any questions or discussion topics you'd like to talk about. Then Matt said, "Dozer got stomped." Well, I feel like the idea of that game is really to make a character and less to get the most points. Kel said, "He doesn't have a name yet, but I have his power. He has the queen suit, and he has the power to create a virus. Everyone that gets the virus will slowly turn into a clone of him." Interesting. So that's the poker game character that you're drawing. What are some of his like design features, like his aesthetics? Then Matt said he also enabled me to win by 1 point. Dozer somehow boosted your character to do better in the game. Hey. Then Nani said, yo, that vid you posted almost made me pee. So I don't even know what that means, Nani. Could you elaborate? Did you laugh so hard you almost pee? That's most situations where people almost pee from stuff. Matt said the idea of the game is to get the most points. It's just that it has ideas for characters as a secondary goal. I feel like which one you consider to be primary or secondary is dependent on the person. Also, I believe everyone at the table, other than I think Matt, was like, yeah, we're not really playing for points. So I don't know. It's kind of up to you to choose how you want to do it. And then Nani said, yeah, I laughed because of how you looked. He said, I liked it though. I'm glad that you liked the video. Yeah, I do think the cosplay edited pictures thing was interesting. I think the last image where I tried to do a static shock thing is the dopiest one. I think that one looks really weird, but I tried. If you think that looks dopey, you should see the ones where I tried to do it in color. The black and white one I thought looked less cartoony, um, but I don't know. I'm curious to see what your thoughts would be on the colored one. I can try and pull that up and show it to you. Let's see. Kel said, but he doesn't gain or can control the power of any of the people he infects, and his clones all have the same personality. It's like a hive mind. That sounds like an interesting concept. I'd be curious to see like how he uses that in sports. Does he just infect the other team and just kind of goot the other team that way? I could potentially see something like that. And then Matt said, "So Darkgale stomps." Okay. I was gonna send you guys a link to a colored version of the Static Shock picture, but when I tried to send it as a link, it just didn't want to cooperate. So what I will do is try and make a smaller link and then send that. So then Matt said, I feel like we're getting into biological warfare in a world where war doesn't exist. Matt is still harping on the fact that in your fictional universe, Kels, that war is explicitly stated not to be a thing. I mean, Matt, maybe that clears the way for war to be more of a thing as the story continues. We could see it maybe develop and build if Kel so chooses to go in that direction. But if he doesn't want to, then I mean, he doesn't have to. He doesn't really need to. Okay. So here we go. And then Matt said, but he won't. But it doesn't matter whether or not he will or won't. You know, it's up to him. Let's see. So here's Static Shock edited cosplay picture colorized. So I think, Nani, it looks dopier in color. Ooh, it didn't let me send it. It was not a fan of that at all. I'm curious if it hates tiny URLs. Because that could be the thing. Yeah, it blocked it twice. So I may not be able to do the tiny URL. Or maybe if I do the tiny URL, I need to make it not look like a URL. So I'm gonna put in spaces between things and see how that works. Oh, see, that worked. And then I imagine if you still copy and paste that link, it'll just concatenate it together. That's my assumption. But let me see, because I think that is an interesting idea. Matt said, there is not a hard enough force to prevent war from happening, so war not happening is nonsensical. I don't think it's something that has to be wrote on, though. Huh. So you guys will have to get rid of those spaces if you guys want to see the picture. Because I tried to copy it as is with the spaces, and Google doesn't understand what it is, which I think is why it gets past YouTube. Fair enough. Let's see, Kel said, Matt, I'm not saying war doesn't exist. The story just takes place in a time of peace. So he's not saying that there is no war at all. It's more that he's saying that, like, it's not relevant. Well, it's not even that he's not saying this. He's not saying that it's not relevant to the story. Even though that'd be true. It is true that it's not relevant to the story. It's just, it's a time of peace. I don't know, I feel like if you were like, it's not relevant to the story, Matt would be more down. I think he'd be more understanding of it. Facebook Messenger has been really gross recently. It keeps trying to do stuff where it'll hide messages that have been sent, and then you have to click load more to see the messages where before you could just scroll. I prefer just the freedom to scroll. Let's see. Matt said, I would again recommend No Game, No Life for an example of a world run by games that can't enact war. He said, but people are always at war with each other in some capacity. So Matt's like, he just feels like there's a better way to execute that specific kind of thing. I think what you're doing is fine, Kels. I feel like the only thing that made it weird for Matt is that you stated explicitly that it was like not a thing at a certain point. But I feel like that doesn't really matter. You know what I mean? Let's see. Matt said Jet also has bad opinions, so take his words with a grain of salt. I mean, opinions are subjective by definition, so it's whatever. Let's see. So I've been doing some picture editing today, and I found a website that seems really good for editing out the backgrounds of photos. I feel like I'm going to do more picture editing, and then I'm also going to try and use edited pictures for some of my book covers. I actually think there's a lot I could do with editing pictures now. Let's see, Matt said, but most people can believe an opinion is bad, making it taboo to have said opinion. I mean, sure. Depend. Yeah, it's like a different strokes for different folks. So it has to do with like what culture you're in, and it doesn't make it no longer subjective. You know what I mean? It just there's a difference between an unpopular opinion and being objectively wrong. So I feel like those are actually two very different things. You can be right about something that you say, but not everybody like it. But that's also not the position that I'm taking my opinions. My opinions are subjective. I'm not saying that anything that I say is good or bad is objectively good or bad. I'm just saying from my perspective, I just may or may not vibe with it. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on that particular topic. I'm actually really hype about doing a lot of picture editing stuff. For one, I like to use a lot of royalty-free images for my book covers. But if I can just edit images myself, that'll actually do a lot, like to just help out in general with that kind of thing. I could start making my own book covers with the greatest of ease. So I think I'm going to start doing stuff like that. I think that would be pretty cool. Let's see, Matt said, hinging on the fact that something is subjective is not a strong enough defense of the opinion itself. Well, the idea is when you're like, your opinions are bad, saying that an opinion is bad is in its own right a subjective thing. Like, in your opinion, my opinion is bad. But it's just subjectivity stacked on subjectivity. So to me, in the end, it doesn't really matter. It's all kind of just the same thing. Let's see. Matt said Jet actually put an effort into his products. Wow. Well, I mean, the edited pictures, I still would edit together multiple royalty-free images. But now that I can edit my own pictures pretty confidently, I feel like I could do some solid book covers. Let's see. And then, where are we at? Kel said, well, Matt, the war thing isn't relevant to the story. The story takes place in a time of peace, and the 4 fictional countries of the world have agreed not to use powers even if war does happen. Which I do feel is fairly realistic to an extent, what Kells is saying, because in the real world, we do have certain weapons that we're like, hey, that's not cool in war. Like, we've agreed, like, using those kinds of weapons would be going too far. So you'd apply the same stipulation as something like superpowers, but I can also see how people would still use superpowers that don't have immediately obvious effects in order to still try and, like, get around that. But regardless, I still could see something like that happening. Nani said it looks cool. You like the colored version of the Static Shock picture? Because I don't know. I showed the colored version to Beth, and I mentioned that they look goofy before I showed them to her, and then she was like, "Yeah, they look goofy," and then I did the black and white one, and then she was like, "Oh yeah," like she seemed to vibe with the black and white one. I could upload a slideshow that's just only the Static Shock pictures if you want it. But I do think they're pretty dopey. But I'm glad that you liked the colored version of it. Let's see. And then Kel said, so it doesn't really matter. Then Matt said, but then defend your subjective opinion if you believe it to not be bad. Well, I don't really know what you mean. So when you're like, defend your subjective opinion in order to show that it's not bad, well, what is, like, what defines a good or bad opinion other than the subjectivity of the person? You know what I mean? So I guess I could try and defend it, right? If you had reasons for why you feel like the opinions are bad. Because then I could go through your reasons, and if I could see that your reasons were objectively wrong, then I can try to be like, oh, well, that reason's just not true, and then work from there. But if all your reasons are also subjective, then it just doesn't do anything. You know what I mean? I'd just be like, oh, well, that's just how you feel about each thing, and you don't really have a certain logic behind it. So it really depends. You got to break it down, I guess, for me to really try to defend it. Let's see. Matt said, what's more, we keep having weird powers that come up that seem very much intended for war. Well, in a world where people are specifically making superpowers to try and use in sports, because it seems like everyone's goal is directly tied to being good at sports, so it seems like everyone's power would also probably be tied with being good at sports. I could see how sports and war could be rather similar. Both have to do with competition and trying to get an edge on an opponent. So you could still use them within the context of a sport and it not be used for war. Let's see. And then Matt said virus powers are very much not your friendly sports power. If you take over the whole other team, then I feel like that kind of helps you in a sporting event. You know, if you saw if you saw two teams go head to head in a sport, and then by the end of the game they're all one team, then doesn't that one team just win by default once the other team doesn't have any members? Like, I think it makes sense. Nani said, yeah, upload it. Sure, I can upload that after the stream. Matt said, and the fact that these powers are tied to one's desires means that this becomes even stranger. Well, if it's tied to someone's desires, then maybe the person wants more people to be like them. I could see that being their desire, though it seems, from one perspective, it could be very narcissistic. I think from all perspectives, it's actually pretty narcissistic. Even if the person was like, I'm such a good person that if everyone was like me, the world would be better. That's pretty narcissistic, like, regardless. So yeah, it seems like kind of the powers of a narcissist. Matt said, Jet, you can still make a convincing argument to persuade someone to buy into your subjective opinion, regardless of subjectivity. Well, the easiest way for me to defend my point, specifically for you, because you seem to have like the biggest gripes with my opinions, would be if you listed out reasons for why you felt like my opinions were bad. And then I could, reason by reason, try and break down your argument to show that, like, hey, maybe it's not as bad as you thought. You know what I mean? It has a lot to do with, like, why you think my opinions are bad, how I would then defend my opinions. Then Matt said, taking over the entire team affects way more than just the sport. Well, I understand where you're coming from, because that would be like the rest of their lives, they are a clone of that guy, unless it's temporary for whatever reason, or there's a cure for the virus. Um, but it still helps with sports, nonetheless, Matt. Let's see. Beth asked, how is the vlog going? The vlog is going well so far. I am enjoying it. And then I'm going to ask her, how is her night so far? So right now, Kells is drawing his poker game character. Poker game being the webcomic that he's making. Matt's complaining about my opinions. Nani wants me to upload the Static Shock video, where I guess it would be only the Static Shock images. I can do that. I just have to make and upload it after the stream, which wouldn't take long at all. I also want to do a fan art compilation thing. I feel like I've had more than enough fan art for a while. I just haven't gotten to it, so I might as well just do that now. So I'll probably also do that tonight. Um, let's see. Vanessa Brooks is currently playing Fire Emblem Three Houses, and Dragon Ball Superfan 10 is hoping that the Tokyo Ghoul RPG will be good. And I think that's all the topics that we've discussed so far, just to catch everybody up. Let's see. Kel said he can deactivate the virus so that they don't stay a clone forever. My question would be, what does he get out of deactivating the virus? Like, what benefit does he get by deciding, yeah, you know what? I might as well just not. It's like, well, why not? You could just have them be a part of the hive mind, and you could that could just be a benefit to you. I don't know why he would choose not to do it. Matt said, because you put forth the minimum amount of effort to write or stream things. The idea that every fight needs to be a clever exchange of wit to be interesting is bland. You have so little foresight that it isn't even funny. So my retort to that, Matt, I do feel like fights do need to be a clever exchange of wit for them to be interesting. I do think there needs to be some form of you weren't just objectively better than the other guy. You know what I mean? Or if you were better than the other guy, it's because like you trained and you worked hard to become better than the other guy, and that should be a part of the story. You know what I mean? A lot of the times when I do my superpower battle stories, a big part of it is that I put the hero in a situation where they're kind of the underdog. They're not definitely going to be like the strongest guy in the room necessarily, or if they are, then the opponent has some kind of counter power to them. And I do find stories just more interesting in general if it has to do more with strategy than just simply overpowering your opponent. I think just overpowering your opponent just isn't that compelling of a story, and probably isn't a story that needs to be told. You know what I mean? Especially if the fight is the focus of the story. If the bread and butter of the story is this character is going to fight this other character, if it's simply a stomp in one direction or another, then why are we even reading it? Like, what is the story reason for why we need to see this fight? Matt said, plus the virus is still in the body and could just be activated again. I mean, based on what Kells is saying, the virus is practically a magic virus. So you know what I mean? He could just choose to cut it off or cut it on when he wants. Then Matt said, Jet, if every person was clever Witman, then what's the point of having different characters? So Matt, again, I feel like a lot of times people don't read superhero stuff and then criticize superhero stuff. How often have you ever seen a satisfying, super-powered fight, satisfying, where the victor wasn't clever or using some kind of cool strategy to get around their opponent? Like a satisfying fight. Because I've seen fights where the victor won because the bad guy just kind of ran out of steam, or the victor won because they didn't actually win, it was a tie, and the fight gets interrupted, or the person who won because like their friend jumped in and they helped them, and I don't like any of those fights. All fights that are like that, I think, are kind of bullshit. Like I'm not interested. Um, for example, the tie thing is very common, where two characters go head to head. It's a really hyped up fight, and in the end, how'd they win? They didn't. They get distracted. Something else happens. Oh, don't pay any mind to the fight. Something else is going to occur, and I've never fucked with that. That's always been weird. You know what I mean? Nani said, I'm lost, Nick. Are you lost in the sauce of the stream, or are you lost like you need like Google Maps? Like what kind of lost? Right now, Matt again is just complaining about opinions. Kells is trying to defend his webcomic that Matt is complaining about. Matt's complaining about my superhero stories, and he wants me to defend my opinion of them. So I'm going into detail about why I enjoy the type of superhero stories I enjoy, stuff like that. Kel said, well, the only time he would willingly deactivate is at the end of the game. But then my question would be, why would he willingly deactivate it, Kels? Like, why would, if I just had a hive mind of people and they were like, yeah, no, I'm fine with being a part of the hive mind. Because if you were part of the hive mind, I don't think you'd resist. Then I think you're good. Like, unless their family sued you or something. What are the legal consequences of if he, like, kept people in the hive mind? Like, how would that work? Matt said it also just makes more sense for some individuals to just be objectively better than others in a world with powers. But then why would that fight be the center focus of anything? Again, I never like it when big story fights are literally like, I'm just stronger than you. And it's not like you had a flaw in your strategy. It's not like my strategy was better than yours. It's just that I'm better and you just lose. Because I don't think that's an interesting fight. The only times that I think they try and make stuff like that interesting is when a character is like, I'm just better than you, but I have a handicap that is either imposed on me or I self impose. Um, an example of that would be Superman in the fucking. I gotta remember what it's called. There's a Superman animated thing where he lobotomizes a guy. I'm just gonna type in Superman lobotomy. Superman versus the Elite. Yeah, in Superman versus the Elite, Superman fights off against the Elite, and I think it's a situation where Superman's trying to intimidate the Elite, like he's trying to like fuck with them, and he's not just trying to like uber slam them. You know what I mean? He wants it to be more like a Batman kind of thing, where he meticulously takes them down and he shows off the different powers that he has. Like he's trying to showboat. It's supposed to be a flex. But because he's doing it as a flex, instead of doing the easy thing, which would be to just kind of speed blitz through everybody, because he really doesn't have to use a variety of different abilities in order to take them down. But he does. And even then, it's still not the most satisfying thing in the world because it's not like he's necessarily challenged. Like, you want a challenge. And I feel like if a character isn't challenged, then it's not really a good fight. But the way that you challenge a character truly is through like a strategy thing. It like even if it is your opponent is more powerful than you, it's still a strategy. You still don't just do it. You know what I mean? Let's see. Matt said, and also, well, I already read that. He said, what's more, there are story reasons for stomps to exist, such as Spolflovich versus Vidal. That fight is not like the whole story is that fight. And if it was, it wouldn't be satisfying. That's keep in mind, the stories that I'm writing are supposed to be like climactic battles, like really big fights between two legitimately like matched characters. You know what I mean? Spoflovich versus Vidal is like a smaller part of a bigger story that can be summed up into Goku versus Boo. You know what I mean? You don't need necessarily to have all that extra stuff. Not saying that extra stuff is bad, but I'm specifically writing short stories that focus on the fights that are at the end of things, not like weird middle fights. You know what I mean? So I feel like that's just not as relevant as you think. Then Matt said Dragon Ball isn't always about wit and the fights are interesting. So I'm about to hit you up with that hot take, Matt. not every Dragon Ball fight is really that good. And I would argue that a good few Dragon Ball fights aren't very good. Um, for one, I do think Dragon Ball does have good fights. Not saying all of them are like ass or anything. But if you name like a good few Dragon Ball fights, I can probably tell you what I think is wrong with said fights, like what I don't like about them. So feel free to like name a Dragon Ball fight that you like really fuck with, and I'll tell you what I like about it and what I don't like about it. Kel said, well, he wouldn't use the clones after the game. He would only use it during the game. He could keep the people he infects infected, but it would be impractical because it uses spirit and out of character. So you feel like it would be a continual drain on him to keep those people infected. I think I see where you're coming from, Kels. Matt said, why would a story only be one fight? Because in the end, that actually is just like the bread and butter of most of these stories. So if you wanted to, you could actually tell a lot of stories by just having them be one fight. And you may be like, but we miss out on character growth and this and that and the other. And not really. Like, actually not. Most of the time, characters have dialogue. Like, they talk to each other. There are silent fights, and silent fights can be cool too. But when it's a short story, and the story only encapsulates the fight, you can still kind of get the full story. Most characters will talk about their motivations, their goals, why they're fighting, because that helps drive the plot forward. But a lot of times, because of the fact that they're longer running stories, it's redundant. When Vegeta goes, I am the Prince of all Saiyans, and you have. I can't believe you, Kakarot. A lower class Saiyan like yourself, challenging me, the Prince? I will defeat you once and for all and prove that I am the true Prince of all Saiyans. You know, like, when Vegeta says stuff like that, we already kind of know that. We don't really need him to say it. So why does he say it? He says it because it helps drive the plot forward within the fight and give context to the fight as it's happening. But if the whole story is the fight, like if you cut out everything else, you still understand Vegeta's motivation. Which is why you can sum up a lot of fights. You really can. Merge Zamasu, for example, he doesn't shut up about what he wants. He's like, justice in my mind, in my vision, I will make that a reality. So, by wiping out all the mortals, I will bring true justice. You know, like, everyone talks about what they want. Everyone does in a fight. And if everything before the fight is telling you what they want and building up to the fight, you really don't need that buildup. If the fight itself has the narrative context needed, it itself can be a short story that can be understood and entertaining, is what I'm saying. Let's see. Matt said micro stories by themselves that only have one fight don't have enough meat to justify only having one fight. That's not true. That's what I'm like currently describing. If enough context is given within the fight itself through character dialogue, which most of the time it is, then you're good. You don't really need to have like that much more. I'm not saying that longer stories are bad, but I'm saying the short stories are fine the way they are. You don't really need more than just the fight to get the context of what's happening. You get the fight, and you get the aftermath of the fight. You know, what happens to both people. And a lot of times it's good enough. You get like more than enough out of that. Let's see. Then Matt said, Jet, we were talking about fights as a whole, and not explicitly final fights. I don't think that's true. I don't think that is what we're talking about. So you're currently criticizing my short stories, and you're doing so by saying, look at all these fictional fights where it's not like wit and strategy and cunning that is the deciding factor. And I'm saying all those fights as standalone fights are pretty ass. Like if you had a story that was just those fights, you'd be like, wow, what a pretty fucking unentertaining story. I'm saying that the final fights work perfectly well as short stories. Like they can work as self-contained things and give you enough context to understand what's going on. You know what I mean? So it's pretty simple. Let's see. And then Matt said, wit has its place, but that doesn't mean that every fight needs to be about wit. I'm not saying that every fight in fiction, period, should be about wit. But I'm saying those final fights, those fights where it's like, this is what's gonna be the payoff of the story, is that main dude fights main bad dude. Like those fights, if it's not some kind of like strategy based thing, I feel like they're cheap and they're not as interesting. They just kind of end up being gross. Kel said, I think fight doesn't need to be that complicated. Sometimes fights can be enjoyable just for the visuals and or because of the people in the fight. I think, again, for the really big fights that are the main person versus the main bad guy, it has to have that extra element. I feel like if it has nothing to do with strategy, if there is no like true logic behind how the protagonist overcame the antagonist, other than just some like cheap bullshit thing, then I don't care. I feel like the fight isn't really worth telling, and it's actually kind of disappointing. Like when you build up that far, and in the end it just doesn't matter. You know what I mean? It just seems kind of gross. Matt said just because the fight has dialogue and narrative context doesn't mean that it should be the only source of narrative context. If a fight has a significant story context, then spouting dialogue can actually detract from the fight, and we end up with stuff like Naruto Shippuden, where we spend 10 episodes in a fight because of constant talking. Well, the reason why it's bad in stuff like Naruto, where they have like a ton of dialogue, is because they show you all that extra stuff before. But I feel like if Naruto straight up was broken down to its major fights, and when they do those flashbacks and stuff that feel like they take forever, that was like the first time you ever saw those scenes. And when they talk about stuff that they've been preaching about for like 30 episodes, if you hear that speech the first time in that fight, it's just way better. It just actually has more impact, and it's just more tight and concise and enjoyable. And that's where I feel like the short stories really are able to embrace that. You know what I mean? Matt said narrative context needs to be divulged before and after the fight as well as during the fight in order to have good pacing. So the way that I normally pace out my stories, I introduce the characters, settings, and the fact that they're fighting at the beginning. Then I put the main character into a situation where it seems like they're going to lose. The villain is then like, hey, I'm feeling myself. You're about to lose, or it already seems like you've lost. And then the hero's like, I'm not done yet. And then the villain's like, whoa, I thought I already had flipped the tables on you. How are you able to like get past what I did? I can't really believe what's going on. And the hero's like, using my powers in some clever way, I was able to get out of my previous predicament. To which, oh wait, also, back to the villain gloat, when the villain thought that they were about to win. For the villain gloat, I also have the villain at that moment during their gloat be like, and now, after all this time, explains motivations, I can finally achieve goal. And then when the hero reveals how they were able to get past what the villain did, the hero also is like, yeah, and explains motivations. I'll never give up, and I will achieve goal. They kind of have their back and forth, and the villain then goes, "You may have been able to use your powers to get around my diggity doo, but now that I've seen you use your powers in order to get around what I did originally, now I'm able to do a thing that you won't be able to get around." And then the hero's like, "Oh shit!" So then the villain's doing their thing, and the hero can't do what they did before. So the hero kind of desperately has to try and come up with a solution, and they may even try multiple times to try and get past whatever the villain's doing. But in the end, they finally have that like aha moment, that epiphany, and they're able to overcome by outwitting their opponent in some way. And then after the fight, the hero is able to go and achieve their goals uninhibited by the antagonist, and we get to see what happens when the hero achieves their goal, or more or less just be able to see that the hero is able to achieve their goal happily. And that's pretty much all you really need. You know what I mean? For like a short and concise story. And again, I'm not saying all stories need to be like this, and I'm not saying this is the one true perfect formula or anything like that. I'm saying that I like short and concise stories like this, and that I write short and concise stories like this, and that there is enough narrative context for you to understand what's going on in the stories, and that you don't really need much more than that in order to understand these stories. Let's see. So then Matt said, here's a final fight that doesn't really have much wit to it that is satisfying. Broly versus Goku and Vegeta. The ratio of wit to not wit is heavily skewed towards not wit and is satisfying. So, real quick, Matt, you got to think about it. How does the fight actually end? Gogeta versus Broly. Because it's not actually that good of a fight. Gogeta versus Broly ends with Broly just kind of getting zipped out. You know what I mean? You don't actually get to see how that concludes. Seems like Gogeta probably would have beat Broly. Seems like that's where it was going. I don't know. It's kind of weird. I don't really like cop out fights, which is what I was explaining earlier. Um, because seems like Gogeta would have won. Maybe not. Um, I would have actually preferred to have seen Broly get like hit, like if Broly just died, and then they were like, "We wish Broly back to life" or something. That would have been fine. Even then, you're like, they didn't use wit to beat him. They straight up have Frieza like hold Broly off while they go and train and practice in the fusion technique to come back and get the edge over their opponent. They weren't like, we just hit him harder, bruh. They were like, how are we going to face off against someone who's this powerful? We have to become more powerful. How can we become more powerful? We have to use this technique together. How are we going to be able to use this technique if Broly's all up on our ass? Frieza, you need to get in the way. Awesome. Zip, cool. Now we got to practice this technique, and we have to get good enough at it to where we'll be able to use it against Broly. Now we have come back, and we're able to turn the tables on Broly because we actually had time to make a plan and strategize and find a way to overcome Broly's power. Almost like they thought out a strategy where Broly just was mad. Like I don't really know what you mean. I just feel like that fight wasn't the best example of a Dragon Ball fight that you could have used that was just kind of there. Yeah, I feel like you could have maybe had a better example of that. Kel said for big boy fights, it does need strategy of some sort. Earlier I was referring to just fights in general. And I feel like that's a discrepancy that's been caused by communication by Matt. I am talking about satisfying fights that are like final fights for stories. They're the thing that a story builds up to, not the fights along the way. That like main fight, the like main event, needs some form of strategy involved to determine winner versus loser for them to be interesting fights. That is where I am coming from. Let's see. Matt said if those scenes are seen for the first time, the fight still drags because it is 10 episodes long. So, I will say this. I do think fights shouldn't be long. I really don't think fights should be long. And the reason why I don't think fights should be long is because fights aren't even long in real life. You know what I mean? And I know we're talking about fiction, but you just don't normally fight forever. That's not really the idea of a fight in the first place. Like you're trying to incapacitate your opponent, and in most cases you would just want to get to your best thing as soon as possible. I understand Death Battle, the show on YouTube where they pit two fictional characters against each other, and they're like they have to step through the different things that they can do because we're just trying to do a showcase of all their abilities before we get to their strongest thing. I understand that because that's kind of the point of the show. I feel like outside of stuff like Death Battle, like just in things where it's like within the context of the story, two characters are supposed to fight. I don't really understand why, unless there's a legitimate story reason, why those characters wouldn't go as hard as they should for that fight, especially for a climactic fight, like a fight at the end. Why is there no holds bar? Well, why is there an absence of no holds bar? Um, I understand story reasons, like I said, because in Avatar: The Last Airbender, Aang is like, I don't want to kill anybody. Fair. I understand why he'd be holding back. But if anything, that helps make that fight more interesting. Because Fire Lord Ozai doesn't give a fuck. Like, he is going to hold bar. So, I actually like stuff like that. That's cool. Um, but outside of reasons given in the story why characters shouldn't go as hard as they should, I feel like in most fights, characters should be going as hard as possible. And I do feel like you wouldn't like pussyfoot around. For Goku, it's like a personality thing. I get why he would. Um, Naruto, I honestly don't know why he wouldn't try his hardest. A lot of times he's in like really dangerous situations, and he doesn't live in a world where you just have Dragon Balls and you wish people back to life. Let's see. Matt said, "What you are proposing does not fix pacing issues." I don't think the stories are badly paced. I feel like the short stories that have the fight are perfectly fine with their pacing. Because you get everything that you need out of the story. And because of how short the fight is, it's not even like what do you think is the issue with the pacing, Matt? Do you think the short stories are paced too fast? Are they paced too slow? To just be like there's an issue with pacing is vague. Matt said, what you are also suggesting means that you are following a formula for what is a good climactic fight, meaning that said formula can and will get stale after enough repetitions. Fun fact, Matt, most people, it's not even most people, most stories are formulaic, just in general. I would highly recommend that you check out Booker's 7 Basic Plots. It's just a quick Google search. Just look at like the TV tropes page. It's very common for stories to follow a formula. And I don't think just because a story follows a formula means that it is stale. Formulas are very loose and you can play with so many different elements that you can tell a very, very large amount of stories using the same formula that still feel and are different from each other. Let's see. Matt said, "You're writing 4 to 6 stories each week with this formula. We have a problem." I don't really think we have a problem. Um, Again, Matt, from someone who, A, isn't reading the stories by choice, because I've offered to like send you stories if you want to check them out and critique them. That's totally fine. And B, you don't read superhero fiction in general. So I just feel like you're missing out. It's a thing where you're like, formulas are bad, and if you write to a formula enough, it's just not. No one's gonna want to read it. And it's like, have you read superhero comics, and just seen that a lot of those follow a very similar, overcoming the monster kind of formula, or just daytime television, or just anything else. There's a very common plot structure for things that are based around fighting, and it's normally overcoming the monster of Booker's 7 Basic Plots, which I will say my formula definitely takes inspiration from, but isn't exactly the same as. Let's see, where we at? Kel said, "Matt, I feel you're missing what Jet's saying. A good fight has some sort of strategy in it. It's not the number one thing that makes a good fight. It's an aspect of a good fight." I'd say it's a pretty big aspect. I am emphasizing that I do think without strategy, I think it will break a fight. Like it won't be as good. Specifically talking about like climactic fights, like those final battles that determine like the end of a story. Matt said, "Jet, that Broly fight was engaging because of the narrative context. We were made to care about Broly. So having that moment where we aren't 100% certain that Broly will live is important. Is it though? So I feel like a lot of people came out of the Broly movie, and this is a subjective thing, and they were like, "Man, I really vibe with Broly." I don't give a fuck about Broly. Personally, I don't know. I didn't come out of that movie going, "Wow, I'm a Broly fan now." I want to know what his arc is. He's like a weird caveman dude, and to me, he doesn't have enough going on with him because he's not really that developed of a character. Dragon Ball Super Broly. He lived on a planet with his dad, and he was stronger than his dad, and his dad raised him to survive, and he was really powerful. And his dad puts a collar on him, try to help control his rage or whatever, and keep him from like just going crazy. And then they learn that Frieza's still alive and shit, and Frieza takes him on the ship. Even recounting it, I really don't care that much about Broly. Here's all you really need for the Broly fight. I'll hit you up. So, Goku and Vegeta are pretty much about to like lose. They're about to get hella dicked. This is where I would start after explaining characters. So I guess this is where I would have started. I would have started by going like, this is who Goku is. This is who Vegeta is. This is who Broly is. They're currently like in the Arctic. Some like miscellaneous friends exist. I'm not exactly sure if I would describe the friends or not. I probably wouldn't. I'd probably be like Goku, Vegeta, Broly. That's all you need to know for now. Other people will like show up later, and it'll be fine. Goku, Vegeta, Broly, Arctic. I'd explain like their powers and shit, and I'd explain like the stakes of the fight vaguely. I'd be like, "Yo, if they, what the fuck were the stakes?" Actually, that's a really good question. Frieza just wanted to be taller. That's what he was going to use the Dragon Balls for. He was just going to be slightly taller. So, what were they? What were they really fighting for, in the first place? I think that also makes or breaks a fight, to be honest. Because if the stakes aren't really there, then it's like win or lose. What? Frieza gets a few inches. It's just kind of lame. Um, can someone, before I continue on that, refresh me on what the stakes were for that fight? Like, legitimately. I actually don't know. Let's see, where are we at? Kel said, yeah, Gogeta was going to be Broly. They wished him away because Gogeta was going to kill him. He said, I really liked the fight. I thought it was very entertaining. I don't know. I feel like the more I look at it, like the more I look at that fight, the less I'm like, you know what I mean? On it specifically. Let's see. Matt said, and yes, fusion and leaving Broly to Frieza is wit, but the majority of that fight is effectively either Goku and Vegeta overpowering Broly, or Broly overpowering Goku and Vegeta. So did you just say that the most of the fight is filler? Dun 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 dun. Dun, 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 congratulations, Matt. Dun, 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 recognize a filler. Dun, 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 do, 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 do. Also, I noticed that Kels is dipping. Yo, Kels, thank you for tuning in. I hope that you enjoyed your time on the stream. Don't forget to smash that like button if you haven't already. And I hope you have a wonderful night. But yeah, most of that fight was filler, Matt. I'm glad that you recognize that. Then Matt said, what is it? He said, if I was a fan of superhero comics, then my opinions might be more lenient, but because I am not a fan, or more specifically, I am indifferent to it, I can make more unbiased opinions. So I feel like there's a difference between necessarily having an unbiased opinion and an uninformed opinion. You know what I mean? Because essentially, what you're doing is you're going, your superhero stories are bad. And then I'm like, based on the context of superhero stories, and then you're going, no. And then I'm like, within the context of superhero stories, I think it's pretty good. And then you're like, I have no awareness of this context of superhero stories of which you speak of. but I say it's bad. And I'm like, you can say it's bad. That's totally fine. It's your opinion and it's subjective. And then you're like, no, fight me on it. Fight me on my bet. Hit me up. And I'm like, I'm just gonna talk about more about how it fits within the context of what superhero stories are, and how it kind of gets to the meat of what a superhero story is and what they build up to be. To which then you are like, no, Jet, well, that doesn't matter. It's objectively bad, and here's how. And I'm like, you just can't. It can't be objectively. It's just subjective. And you're like, no, I have reasons unrelated to the context of which you were writing your stories, and reasons for why you write them. And you will repeatedly state those reasons, but they won't matter to me. And it's like, sure, if that's how you feel. I don't know how we're gonna get anywhere. Let's see. So where are we at? So Matt said, and the fight is still enjoyable the entire way through. You can like filler. That doesn't mean that it needs to be there. Again, I'm writing short stories. Superhero fight short stories. And it's supposed to be, like, the stories I'm writing are supposed to be concise. And I just feel like, you know, for that conciseness, you can cut that filler out. You don't really need the filler there. They don't have to have filler. Let's see. And then Matt said, Jet, I have read your stories, and each time I dive in, I'm disappointed. As for me not reading superhero stories, I shouldn't have to read a specific type of reading to be able to critique it for what it is. If I was a fan of superhero comics, then my opinions might be more lenient, but because I'm not a fan, or more specifically indifferent, I make more unbiased opinions. So again, let me analyze your statement and hit you up. So Matt's like, Jet, I have read your stories. So Matt, I think the last story I sent you was from Superpowered Battles Volume 1. And I'm now writing Superpowered Battles Volume 6. So you haven't read my writing for 5 volumes? And you could be like, 4 volumes. And you could be like, 5. No, it'd still be, well, you haven't read 2, 3, 4, or 5. So 4 volumes. You could be like, 4 volumes, not that much. But it's 16 stories you haven't read yet. And I just feel like it's a thing where you're like, based on one story I read from one volume of your thing, you know, it's just weird. You're rating essentially me as a writer off of a very small portion of things I have written. So I don't know. It feels kind of weird. Also, you're like, as for not reading superhero stories, I shouldn't have to read a specific type of reading to be able to critique it. And I guess what I'm saying is, you want me to defend my opinion for why I like the type of stories that I write. A big part of the reason why I like the stories that I write is because I feel like they embody the meat of what a superhero story builds up to be, that final climactic battle, while being concise and, it's weird to say well-rounded enough, but concise I think is good enough. It's concise enough for you to be able to understand what's going on, still enjoy the story, still feel the payoff, and still be satisfying without being a longer thing. And that's a big part of what I enjoy about it. And I feel like part of that enjoyment comes from reading a lot of comics that aren't like that. Comics that try and build on like arcs over time. Comics that have issues where there's no action like the whole time. But they all still build to that same point, to that climactic final battle. But you can tell that story and you can still get all that information without having all that filler. I do feel like there's a lot of filler in the genre. And I feel like I'm eliminating a lot of filler by keeping the stories concise. And that's a big part of what I enjoy about it. But without you having the context necessarily, you may not be able to enjoy them in the same way. So I don't know. I feel like context does really matter for having more of an understanding of that kind of thing. So there you go. If you want an explanation for that. Let's see. Matt said, yes, Frieza wanted a few inches, but nobody else knew that. The stakes are still incredibly low. I don't know. The audience knew that. Frieza wanting a few more inches on his height might have been cooler if we didn't know that before. Or if Frieza touted very hardly, like, hey, I want this big thing, and at the end it's revealed all I wanted was to get taller. It still makes it kind of shallow. I still feel like in the end, having such a low stakes thing does take away from it, even if it is like a joke. It's just not really that entertaining. Let's see. But Matt said, "What's more, Frieza's silly wish is meant to be comedic, to have a slight bit of levity to the movie, and also parallels Bulma's wish to be a few years younger." And I understand that. I still feel like it takes away from the gravity of the fight. Matt said, "Jet, the fight isn't mostly filler. It is mostly filler. So Dragon Ball has plot built-in filler. Oh shit, we hit an hour. Uh, Real quick, shout out to Rocky Ford and to Ryan. I noticed that you guys jumped in late. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to get to you guys' messages, but I hope that you guys have a wonderful night. Thank you all for watching. If you like this video, make sure to smash that like button, favorite, comment, subscribe, and ding ding ding, ring that notification bell to be notified whenever I do these live streams. So be sure to friend your boy, Jet Black the one logging out. Peace, guys.